Okay? Does anyone have any specific questions that they want to answer just off the top? Great. Awesome. Well, we're excited to be here and to meet some of the people that we've seen online for a while. Thank you for giving us a shot. And when he tells us, we'll get started.
You can start if you want.
Start? Okay. Okay, awesome. I've been given the go-ahead. So I'll try to project my voice. Hopefully all of you can hear me. Just read that name, so you have me. So I'm going to speak in English for this one. We're going to talk about why a lot of people are choosing to use Xano to supercharge and scale their no-code applications. And so I first wanted to start with our overall mission of why we exist as a company, and it's to remove the barriers that prevent people from creating scalable, world-class software. So just as an introduction, my name is Prakash. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of the company. To my left is Mr. Michael Budinsky. He is the head of customer success and community. We flew all the way from California yesterday to be here. We're really excited. A little jet lag, a little tired. So if we sound a little wishy-washy, that's why. But we're very pumped to be here to meet all of you today. Most of you know how software works today, but just as a primer, there's the front end, which is what the user sees. There's obviously a lot of beautiful no-code front-end tools that help you create your web and mobile applications. And there's the back end, which is all the business logic behind the scenes. So for those of you that are really new, so the way I like to describe the back-end complexity is by talking about Amazon's one-click buy. Everyone uses Amazon here, I'm assuming. They have a buy now button. And then all of a sudden, package magically ends up at your doorstep, right? So on the front end, there's like a button that just says buy now, and then magically it ends up at your doorstep. But on the back end, it has to check who you are. It's got to check the distribution center. It's got to check the credit card. It's got to check inventory. There might be 100 different steps that need to happen to make that package show up. So what we like to say is the back end is that orchestration layer that handles all your business logic. Your front end is what the user sees, that presentation layer. I know a lot of you know this, but just in case, I just covered that. So you probably hear people say this: no code can't scale. You should only use it to build your MVP, but hire real developers when they want to launch and scale the product. The reason they say this and what they really mean is actually 4 key points that I want to cover. The first is scalability. So when you use a lot of no-code tools today, they may have been built like as an internal tool, and then like a CRM was put on top of them. So they weren't really built for scale, at least not by today's standards. The second, and this is a common theme that you're hearing in all the workshops, is security and compliance, right? Whether that's GDPR, whether that's HIPAA, SOC 2, name your compliance measure, no code is thought that you can't address it. The third, and this is less known, is interoperability. This means that if a developer, for example, at a company has already written something and they want to leverage it in an existing no-code tool, they typically have not been able to do that. So that's one thing we wanted to enable in Xano. And the final thing is business logic. So the simplest way I can talk about business logic is like Zapier, which connects one service to another. You might, for example, add an email to a CRM every time a calendar invite is sent. But then what happens when you want to enrich it? And then what happens when you want to format the phone number? And then what happens when you want to, and so on and so on and so on. The more complex your business logic is, that's where typically some of these no-code tools have broken down. But what's funny about that is that's what makes your app unique. So you have to be able to do all that stuff. So that's what Xano really was built to really do. So we like to say we're the fastest and easiest way to build a powerful, scalable, and secure backend for any app without using code. And what that really means is that we are your entire backend. And there's 3 major components to the entire backend. There's a scalable managed server, a flexible database, and a no-code API builder. So when I say scalable managed server, unlike a lot of no-code tools, we're very transparent about our infrastructure, and that is we are on Google Cloud. We deploy a single tenant dedicated architecture with Docker. We orchestrate with Kubernetes for scalability, which means we get all of the compliance stuff, which I will talk about a little bit later. If our server or our cloud doesn't work, we even allow you to migrate to your own cloud. That's at the enterprise level, but it is possible as you start to scale. Our database is Postgres behind the scenes, and for those of you that don't know, it's the world's most powerful open source database. And you can scale Postgres horizontally and vertically. And then finally, which a lot of people love, is our Nocode API builder, which allows you to build business logic of any sort. We like to say it's Turing complete, which means it'll go head to head with a programming language around what you can actually do with our Nocode API builder. So a question that a lot of people ask, and kind of what I wanted to cover today, is like, all right, well, there's a lot of all-in-one solutions, Bubble being one of them. Why should I use a separate backend like Xano in the first place? So there's a couple reasons I want to cover. The first is that having a separate backend when you're building any sort of application is generally just good hygiene to have, because let's say you're building your web application in a tool like Bubble, but you might also want to build your native mobile application in a tool like Bravo Studio. Then you might want to build like a dashboard in Power BI, right? You want to have one central source of data that powers all of these different front ends. So Xano, a lot of users use Xano to do that. The second thing is just co-development. It's better to kind of separate the development of your front end and your back end. And this way, regardless if you're using a no-code tool on the front end or a JavaScript framework on the front end, you're able to separate that development with using a separate back end. The third thing is we were built from the ground up with scale in mind. So a lot of people don't know this, but our CTO was actually the lead DevOps on Google Photos. It started with a server on his desk, one server, and by the time he left, he set the underpinnings of the infrastructure that led to Kubernetes and everything that you see today in one of the world's most popular photo scaling tools. So that is the DNA of what is in Xano and what every person gets when they're deploying and building with Xano. Again, I already talked about the architecture here, so I won't cover that much more. But on the compliance and security side, because of what we've done to separate out each client instance, we're also rigorously audited, and we go through yearly audits multiple times a year to get compliance measures like GDPR, ISO 27001, HIPAA. We'll have SOC 2 compliance in December, and then parts of PCI compliance. Now, PCI compliance is very complex. It also depends on the way you build your app. But one thing you hear over and over again, especially at the large company level, is like, hey, look, Nocode can't ever be compliant with our organization. We're embedded in multiple enterprises. We had to go through multiple tests, and we have passed every single time. There's yet to be one that we failed, and we power over 20,000 backends around the world. The final thing I wanted to cover is that we are not at odds with developers. I think some no-code tools will say, like, we're going to replace developers one day. We're definitely not like that. We say we're no-code first, but developer-friendly. So there's four main pieces to what I want to cover there. The first is that we allow you to sidecar in Docker microservices. So let's say you are building for a company, you already have a lot of work that you've already built in a Docker microservice, and you're like, I don't want to throw that away and rebuild in your no-code tool. You don't have to. You can leverage our existing function stack API builder and sidecar in that microservice. The second is Lambda function. If, for example, you're like, I don't want to use your point-and-click no-code API builder, I've already written a lot of not doing this stuff in JavaScript, you're able to do that and leverage the Lambda libraries. We have Redis data caching for things like rate limiting, or let's say you have a very popular API endpoint that you want to cache and have available very, very quickly for users. You're able to do that with Redis. And the final big piece is cloud portability. So if you're building on Xano and you want to build for the long run, we see all the time that they're like, look, you in theory do a good job, but I want to manage my own resources on my own cloud. You're able to migrate Xano off onto your own cloud, which is huge, and typically, again, something you don't see in the no-code ecosystem. So I just wanted to give that primer before I had Michael come into a demo. Raise your hand if you feel like a Xano demo would be helpful and you want to see it versus. Okay, great, awesome. So we're going to do that, and then we'll hold questions till later, but happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. All right, this is exciting. This is my first demo with live people. It's always been two computers. So I'm gonna try. All right. So for today's demo, we're gonna do a reviews app working with this open AI API, which is pretty cool. If you haven't seen it, it's free to get started with. They have a bunch of different examples of using this AI API. The one we're going to use today is at the bottom. It's going to be a restaurant review generator. So we're going to work with this API in Xano to create restaurant reviews. So let's first jump back to Xano and get started. The first step is just to give our project name. So I'm going to name it review app here and hit continue. We're going to start from scratch. I just want to point out that we allow people to import their data from Airtable. So we see a lot of people graduate into Xano when they need something more scalable, need to do more complex data transformations. So if you're starting with Airtable, there's an easy way to turn your data into Xano. So I'm going to hit start from scratch. So on this step, we're going to just first name our database tables. So this app will be pretty simple. It's just a demo. We'll have a user table and then also a review table. And just what I want to point out down here is what Xano does for you out of the box is we auto-generate all your basic CRUD API endpoint operations. You'll see as we go, we can create as many API endpoints as we want. We can get as custom and complex with the business logic in those API endpoints, but this is a really nice baseline to start with. So I'll hit continue. I do want to point out we have this marketplace right here. It's very much at the beginning, but we've integrated with just some popular services. However, with Xano, like we do today, you can integrate with any third-party API. So I'm just going to skip this. It can be configured later. Lastly, just how users will log in, so authentication. Xano will set up user authentication out of the box using email and password and JWT tokens, which is an industry standard. Of course, we have other social sign-in providers, and Apple actually also just got released here. But I'm just going to select email and hit finish. And so real quick, this is the Xano dashboard, which is kind of your home base, gives you a high-level overview of your project. But let's first jump to the database. Let's set up those tables that I created, and then we'll jump to the API and actually create that restaurant review generator.
So Michael, before you do that, will you go to the API and just show the endpoints that were created?
Yes.
So I just want to emphasize what's happened here. So in a couple clicks, this is a fully functioning backend. This is fully documented with the open API. There's a Swagger link right up there, and you can start using this right now. So you can connect this to any front end that you want, and that could be done in like 60 seconds. So it has changed the game in terms of how fast it is to spin up a backend. So Michael's going to do this restaurant creator app using open API as a separate API. So go for it.
Awesome. All right, so first I just want to set up a basic database model for this. You'll see right here my user table. I selected that email login method. So Xano gave me name, email, password, right? So I can add Prakash in here as our user. PrakashChandran.com, password 123, right? He'll be our user for this app today. But let's go into this review table now, right? So let's actually set up some schema here. We just have the ID number and the timestamp when it was created at. So once again, it'll be a simple app. So we first will do a text field here, and this will be the restaurant that we're reviewing. We'll do another text field here, and this will be the actual review. And then last but not least, we'll make a relationship to the user, because the user is going to be reviewing a certain restaurant. And so I just want to point out, as I was adding that schema, we have a lot of options here. You obviously have your text field, integer, you can do objects in here, relationships, but you can do some pretty advanced stuff. Things like geography. You can store images, videos, attachments in Xano. You can even store raw JSON in the database, so it's quite flexible. Of course, we're just doing some basic text fields in a relationship for now, but just know that's all available.
What about numbers?
Numbers, yeah, so we have integers and decimals. So floating number and decimals, yeah. Okay, great. So, obviously I could come in here and just enter in, some raw data, but we want to use the API to actually generate all this. So, let's first jump back to this OpenAI, and let's look at this restaurant review creator. So what this does is it turns just a few words into an actual review of a restaurant. So you can see it gives you a sample here. Looks like this blue board, great place for a lobster, yada yada yada. It gives us this curl command.
But just before you get it, like this, I don't know how many of you have worked with OpenAI before, but it's awesome. So literally, the user is typing, and imagine an app where they're typing lobster, great, noisy, service, prices, good, and then it automatically generates that for you. This is just scratching the surface of what OpenAI can do. So obviously, you can use APIs at the glue of the internet. You can leverage this in your application. So Michael's going to show you how to do that.
Awesome. Okay, great. So I'm going to first jump back to Xano. We'll jump back to that API, where we have all those API endpoints. And I'm actually going to create a new one here. And I'm going to start from scratch. So we'll make this a post because we're going to be adding reviews. And I'm just going to call this review generator. And so what you're seeing here is our Nocode API builder. And so we've broken down an API endpoint into 3 sections. First being inputs or query parameters, so just any information needed for your API endpoint to take in to do what it's going to do. 2 is a function stack. And this is the actual inner workings of your API endpoint. This is where you're going to build all your business logic that is complex with any data transformations that you may need to. And lastly is the response, so something optional you might want to return to push and display onto our front end. Just real quick, here in the function stack, there's so much in here. Database requests, anytime you interact with your database, there's things in data manipulation, where you can store information in variables, do loops, conditionals, etc. I'm first going to start with this external API request here, because we want to call that OpenAI API, right? So if I go ahead and select this, you can see there's some things we need to set up. But what's really great about most documentation from third-party services, like this OpenAI one, is they give you this thing called a curl command. So what we can actually do is I can copy this, come back to Xano, and there's this import curl button here. So I can just paste that in, hit import, and what Xano does is it programmatically builds out this API call for us. So I'll show you, I can run this. I first need to go get my API key, so let me go back and get that from my account. So I'm just in my settings, I'm getting my API key from OpenAI. So here in my headers, you can see there's this placeholder for my API key. So I could just paste that in there, but oftentimes we need to reuse that API key in multiple places. So I'm going to use this thing called %s here. And I won't do this right now, but Xano has environment variables where you can call something across your workspace. So that's typically where I would store an API key. So I can just call it in any API endpoint or function I'm using. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to place them here. So that %s, I can use this filter called sprintf, which actually does text substitution. So it'll look for that value, %s, and I can add an argument in there. And I'll just paste in my key. Now normally I call my environment variable here because I would store the API key there. I'll just paste it in here. But I'll hit save, so it'll look like that now. So I can actually run this. This is the same review as the example. We're tethered right now, so we might be a little slow. But you can see we get a successful response back. You get all this information. And you can see here's that same review from the example, the blue dwarf, lobster dinner, yada, yada, yada. But we want to make this obviously dynamic to work with whatever users inserting information. So let's add some inputs. So let's first do a restaurant. And then let's do notes. So we want to be able to put in a restaurant, put a few notes, and actually generate a review using OpenAI. So if we come back into this API call here, well, if I can go into this prompt here, and if I just open this up, you can see this is the same stuff from that example. So we have name Blue Wharf, that's the restaurant. So I'm going to do %s, and then also we have the notes right underneath. Lobster, great, noisy, service polite, price is good. So I'm going to do %s again. I have 2 %s's here. And I'm going to apply that same filter. And because I have 2, I'm going to have 2 arguments. And that'll just go in sequential order. So first is the restaurant, and then it's the notes. I'll hit save. Save. So now if I go ahead and run this, well, I can put in a restaurant that's close by that we got dinner at last night. Cartier. I can say
We're tourists, okay?
French food, prices. Nice. Okay, so I'll put in a few notes of this restaurant. I'll hit run. We'll wait for the response here. And this will take those notes. And as you can see, we'll get a restaurant. So if you're looking for a taste of France without spending a fortune, Cartier is the place for you. The food is authentic, and the ambience is pleasant. Prices are reasonable, making it a great option for budget-minded diners. Okay, awesome. So we're generating a review now, but we want to go ahead and actually put this into our database. So let's go ahead back to our function stack. I'm going to go to database request, and I'm going to add a record to our review table. So when we add this function to the function stack, you can see there are some things we need to map. So there's the timestamp, which is automatically going to be whatever time it is added. So recognize I have a restaurant input, so grab that. We need review and user ID. So one thing I can add here is just an input for our user ID. So I can go ahead and now just map that up. And then the review. So where do I actually get that from? Because that is contained in this response variable API1, right? So let me just go ahead and show you what all is in there again. If we run this, there's going to be a lot of information that comes. The flex information with these filters, and there's a lot of power in here. Sometimes it's more powerful than our functions. What I can do here is I can just apply this capitalized filter, and it'll just convert that first letter to a capital letter. So I'll hit update, I'll hit save here. Let's go ahead and update the response to now be this review that I'm returning. So if I go ahead and run this and put in user 1, well, you can see it will call that API again. And you can see we have a new record, but let's actually go to the database And we can see all that information has now been populated. There's my restaurant, which was transformed to have that first letter capitalized. And then here's my response that I got from that OpenAI API. So real quickly, just to kind of recap, we were able to quickly call a third-party API that does something pretty cool, right? Takes a few notes, creates a review, extract exactly what we wanted from that response, put it in our database, even transform one of the inputs on the fly, all in just a few minutes. So, yeah, that wraps it up for the demo, I think, and we can open it up to any questions.
Cool. So yeah, just we can do Q. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Always connected with a program like Bubble, Also, you connected. Easy. Do you have a plugin or something?
Yes. So
Process the data.
yeah. So now he can use a GET request and use the API connector in Bubble to basically just plug it in, and it'll connect to any front end you want. I was hoping Toby over there from Bravo Studio would build a front end while we were doing this demo, but that was wishful thinking. I'm just kidding with you.
Yeah, so
Yeah, there you go.
to expand on that, yeah, we would take this endpoint URL and go plug it into Bubble's API plugin, and I have a handful of tutorials on how to do that on our YouTube channel. So
Yeah, so if you type in YouTube Xano Bubble, we'll show you how to do that. However, we're announcing this. We've been working on an SDK that will probably be launched in the next couple of weeks that you will be able to use in Bubble to make that really easy. There's going to be a plugin component coming too, but that from someone in the community is working on that with us. Yeah.
Because it's like painful to do it.
Yes, and we're also currently working on the second version of the function stack. So this function stack is going to get a lot better, and that unchecked thing is coming, which I know you wrote. Yeah. Yeah. And search. Yeah.
Bubble is an integration, so there is already a thing
API, yes. Yeah.
What would you say is the most common front-end local tool that is
we have a lot of Bubble users. We have, it's kind of all over the place. We have a lot of Bubble users. We have Bravo Studio, we have WeWeb, DraftBit. We're a front-end agnostic tool. So like I said kind of in the initial presentation, you're able to connect us to one or many data sources. Yeah. Yes.
Can we use Xano to create a SaaS? Like, if I store my user in a Xano database, can my user have also a database of their own? I don't know.
Let me just to paraphrase the question. It looks like you want to build a SaaS application where a user in Xano would have their own database.
Yes.
What exactly? Tell me a little bit more about the use case. What are you trying to build? Just like high level.
Okay. It's like my users can create and generate put for their customers.
So the answer is it can be done. If you want like the true like single to multi-tenant architecture, there is like a proper way to do that Xano doesn't necessarily support. You can work around it. But right now, the way I would model that is to have a user with it, depending on how big the reviews are, you can store it locally in a JSON object, or you could generate basically another workspace that handles all of that business logic. Yeah. Yes.
I have two questions.
Yes.
First of all, is it possible to make automations?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of so let's say, for example, let's say Michael wanted to have a review automatically generated every night. We would use a cron job or background task for that, which we support. And you can run that, you can set the cadence However, you can either have,
Is it easy to set?
yeah, very easy. So he'll do it real quick, but it's very easy to create a background task. Instead of a response, you define timing.
So we have the same function stack that I just used, and then you just set it on a frequency. So I could have this, and I could have it every 5 seconds, or every day, every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And the other question is it possible to use the database locally for some specific, for instance, you don't have access to internet? Is it possible?
Like, do we have an offline mode? So you
Offline or
offline mode. So usually offline is handled on the front end, but we personally at Xano, our application, we don't have an offline mode. Usually that's because our users store sometimes millions of records with us, so it'd be a little bit difficult.
yeah, and what front end do you recommend?
It really depends on what you're trying to do. If you tell me a little bit about your use case, I can maybe recommend.
Now or later? Or?
Let's get through some other questions and then yeah. Yes.
How do you deal with RGPD?
What's that?
GDPR.
GDPR. So we, if you go to xano.com/pricing, we allow you to deploy in the region of your choice. So right now, for example, if you're deploying in Frankfurt, you're able to store everything there. We also have gone through GDPR compliance audits, and our server, our hardened server, is compliant, and we will also sign a DPA with you if you'd like. Now, obviously, you have to be compliant on the front end as well,
Yeah, sure.
but on the back end, that's how we handle it.
Okay. One more question. You
Yeah.
have a powerful search function,
Yeah.
and we are able to rank the fields we search in.
Yep.
But can we do some dynamic rankings?
Yep. So
Okay, cool.
we support fuzzy search
Yeah.
and with ranking and priority. So you're able.
But the ranking can be dynamic. So let's say with this call, I want this field first, but in the other call, I want this other field.
In the same, like how is the dynamic ranking set?
The ranking is given as an input.
Oh yeah. So in that case, it would be. Do we support dynamic ranking?
It's built on the index.
Without having like
Yeah, we don't. Not dynamic. So you would want them to prioritize certain things.
okay.
I can talk to our CTO to see if we can make it a variable to re-index.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would be really powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Are you already like?
No,
Because we
but-
can message you and let you know when
Okay.
it's. So when you sign up, just say that you came to this talk.
Okay.
Put in your request and say you're here, and then we'll be in correspondence there.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Is it compliant with FDA compliance 21 CFR Part 11 from pharmaceutical industry?
So we don't. Is that specifically for France? We haven't gotten any compliance measures here. However, there's certainly enough to because we're ISO 27001 compliant. That usually umbrellas a lot of different compliance measures. I don't know about that one specifically, but again, if you can message and we can take a look. Sure. Anyone else? That's called Sprint F. Yeah, why don't you guys go to it? Sprint F. So it's a programming concept that allows you to replace any part of a URL or any part of a string with another string. You can also use replace. There's a replace filter as well, but he used %s because if you want to replace multiple things, like he replaced the review and the description, you can do it in sequence. Yeah, that's right.
And can we set a name for this variable, or we only have to manage by rank?
You mean the %s?
Yes.
it's always called %s, and you basically just do it sequentially. If you want to set a name, you would use the replace filter. So I would use the replace filter and say replace what, like replace me or something like that. Yeah, and you can show how you would like go to the one where you just have one URL or something. So for example, the bear token here, he could remove that, and instead of the %s, he would just say in all caps like replace me, and he would do that instead. So he's going to do that right now. Yeah. So now he's using the replace filter, and that'll do the same thing.
Okay, but we will not be able to use the same token in another request.
Yeah, so that's what he was saying earlier. If you want to store tokens as a global variable, go to environment variable. And you add them here. And then you access them everywhere. Yeah. 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 Say, I missed the analytics processing. What was the second part? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the general question was around analytics and high frequency analytics and how we, like our performance times. So typically, depending on how you structure things, you can aggregate the number, like it obviously depends on how much data you're dealing with. For smaller data sets, you can create aggregate functions, and we're very performant with those. But if you want to do like massive aggregate functions over recursive data sets, what we usually recommend is to run a background task and to cache the result. Like if you don't need the same data like brand new all the time, we usually recommend nightly processing and then just have that data ready, refreshed every 24 hours or at a time that you specify. Yeah. Yeah. So just go to the very top. So we have our build plan. This is the server location is in the United States, so you'll experience a little bit of lag, but we allow you to build for free up to 10,000 records, and it's rate limited. The first paid plan is $59 a month. It gives you a dedicated regional server, so you can have it your server somewhere in Europe. No rate limiting, no record limits. The only thing that you don't get is like schema versioning. We have certain data and test environments and more load balancing on the scale plan, which starts at $199. And that scale plan is only the first layer. It's scale 1x. I mean, we have people going up to 8x, 12x, depending on their capacity needs. Master classes with Mike. I like that. That's a nice brand. We definitely want to. Yeah.
No, this afternoon. Let me get my.
Yeah. We definitely want to do more dedicated education to people that are building with Xano. Whether it's going to be with Michael, now he's a head of role, so he has a lot more responsibility. But we will definitely make sure that we're bringing on experts that can use Xano well and can teach the broader community.
Because when you're first using Xano, it's very difficult to understand what it was.
Yeah.
It's very powerful.
Yeah.
You need to learn how to use it.
Yeah.
Because what we do on the web is we have all the data on Xano.
Yeah.
We have different filters.
Yeah.
We send this to Xano to get the data.
Yeah.
But it's a big JSON.
Yeah.
and the bubble doesn't like this.
Doesn't like it, yeah. Yeah,
So we need to do many calls
Yeah.
the same thing to not slow down bubble.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because your use case, so she's using Bubble and Xano together. It's a very unique use case, and what I'm saying is like to do a master class on that. That is like niche to yours, but there's so many other niche use cases. So we're trying to figure out ways to like how do we help people learn about more of the tooling in the product to enable themselves. But I hear you for sure. But yeah, we'll also be around tomorrow, so you can definitely pick our brains if you want to talk debugging or anything like that. Yeah.
As you said,
Yeah. Did you have a question?
How error
So we have a error reporting and error handling. So we have a run and debug tool currently that allows you to traverse the response to see where the error might be happening. We also have a function called stop and debug, so you can debug at it's a breakpoint that you can set anywhere in your function stack. It's harder to use than I would like because you have to like go add function, stop and debug. But in our new version, it's just a click. Yeah. Yes.
when you do this, when there is a big respect,
Yeah.
we can see it.
Yeah.
Because it's too big. Maybe it would be cool to be have an option to
Lazy
one
loaded.
time,
Yeah.
say yes, I want to save the response to see and debug.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, so we're already doing things. Has Sean pushed that version out yet with the 274?
No, that'll be in the next one.
Yeah, so we already have things to address this in the next build because, like, for example, if you have like 500 JSON objects, you probably don't want to see all of them. So we actually have ways to basically lazy load in if you want to see more of them. Yeah, yeah. It's coming up in the next build. But we have even, like, I hear what you're saying. You're saying, like, there should be an option to either get the full payload or not. We don't have that kind of fidelity yet.
and what about save points? Because you have save points,
Yeah.
but only last 20 I think. So when we do some changes with the APA component, we do a lot.
Yeah.
And so we have only the 21, but maybe it would be a good thing to have an option to save the configuration at one moment, so we can test other
That's
things.
coming in the second function stack. It's like batch editing, and you can commit it all at once. And that is actually the first step to better team, merging, branching, everything like that. So we're working on all of that. So it's all being worked on. It's coming. It's just it's slow coming. Yeah. Did you have another question? Okay. Anyone else have a question? Awesome. No, yeah.
Change the tasks. To group tasks because we have a lot of tasks and we can filter search.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for tasks function,
Yeah. We're doing search for tasks, add-ons, functions. Yeah. So you'll see. I'm hoping. I don't want to say the end of the year, but I'm hoping by the end of the year you'll see all of that push. We try to. You know how fast we move. We try to push pretty quickly.
Let's start with the unchecked.
We start with the unchecked, just for Sarah, right over here. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Cool. Thank you. Thank you all. If you wanted to come up, we can talk about your use case if you want. And you feel free to stick around too. It's totally fine.
You are not going to on with the mic.